Welcome back. Our next guest is author Ximena Ortiz, former AP-Dow Jones bureau chief in Santiago and editorial writer for the Washington Times. She's written a provocative book titled The Shock and Awe of America. Ximena Ortiz, welcome to Washington Business Report. I've told you I think this book is really an interesting read on so many different levels, because what you argue is that we took the wrong lessons from 9/11, that when we tried to shock and awe Iraq back in 2003, it was by overwhelming them, but we became overwhelmed post 9/11. What are some of the things that were fallouts of that shocking and awing of America?
Yes, well, when you look at the actual military theory, shock and awe, you realize that there are all these parallels. And so you start to think that our psychological composure was really targeted after 9/11.
And that was part of their intention.
That being the case, exactly, that being the case, it's important for us to examine what our psychological reactions have been and see where we've overreacted and where paranoia and fear has clouded our thinking.
Well, let's get to those, because you have some great examples, starting with Federal Reserve decision making, and this really caught my attention this week, because this week we got some minutes from 2008 that showed big mistakes made by the Federal Reserve in 2008. You went back to the meetings immediately post 9/11, and you point out that people like New York Fed President William McDonough literally said in the Fed meeting, we need to base monetary policy on our patriotic duty to America. And you said he made some mistakes as a result of that.
You know, it was so interesting, because when the bottom fell out in 2008, there were people who were tracing it back to the monetary policy that we instituted shortly after 9/11 in terms of this tsunami of free money that banks and other financial institutions were really given. It was a gift, and these institutions had a party with it.
Yeah.
So I thought that was interesting, and I thought it was important to look back
and see what caused that.
And so I thought, why don't I have a look at the minutes? And I found things there that really surprised me. These are technocrats. They're supposed to be getting together and talking about numbers and talking about very technical issues.
And what's best for the economy, even if it may not be the most psychologically uplifting at that very moment. So that's what I thought was really instructive.
Right, because we really wanted to, at that point, you would think, lay the groundwork for a sustainable recovery. But that quote from McDonough was very interesting, because what he literally said, we need to wave the flag at this moment, and the timing is very important before the markets open. So what you're talking about there is a patriotic monetary policy, from the way I see it.
And you argue that it didn't work. It flooded the markets with too much money. But you say fast forward to today, where we paid the price with the recession in 2008 from being awash in all this easy money. But now we're getting money back into the system. And you argue that there's still some mistakes that we're making because of this psychological mindset from CEOs who are being too reticent to move forward. They continue, in your words, to sit it out. We're stuck in a slow recovery. You argue we're ignoring our domestic infrastructure because we're still so focused on foreign threats. And you touched on the big topic this week, saying we have misspent our military dollars.
It's so interesting how you really have a cascade of consequences. When you overreact, or when you react poorly, and it's not a character assassination. I'm not pointing a finger. It's very understandable how these mistakes were made, but yet they were mistakes, and we have to see them as such. But yes, you have that initial over-greasing of the monetary engine, and then you had the institutions that overplayed their hand with that free money. And the dimensions of this financial catastrophe were such that the administration blinked, and that's what Jose Barrio Nuevo was talking about in my book, where I quote him. He has dealt with very, very disastrous financial crisis in the third world, Argentina to be exact, and he pointed out some interesting parallels. But what's fascinating is that the Obama administration, even though they seemed to be prepared to make the tough choices, they allowed these financial institutions to kind of really sugarcoat their numbers. They did not do traditional accounting. And so what ended up happening is that there was no transparency. And there you have another third world parallel, is the lack of transparency. And so how are we supposed to recover? No one knows what the dimensions of the problem are.
Well, that brings me perfectly to my last question, and I want to get to this before we run out of time. You do have prescriptions for what we need to change. Some provocative ones saying let's decriminalize drugs so we can stop focusing on a war on drugs, but others from scaling back our foreign policy interventions to ending overspending and rethinking military spending, including, you argue, the scale of private contractors. We only have about 30 seconds, but sum that all up for us.
Well, yes, I think, your show dealt with military spending, and I think that's an important thing, because one of the things that we don't think about, we are a wealthy country. Of course we spend a lot of our money on the military. We have a lot of money to spend. What we don't think about is the proportion of money that goes there. We spend money on the military like a third world country when you look at it in terms of percentage of GDP. And when you look at it in terms and proportionally, we are not going to be going back to pre-9/11 levels until 2018, according to the administration's own estimates.
And you say it's time, and a lot more in this book, The Shock and Awing of America. Ximena Ortiz, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Rebecca.
And stay with us, innovators, and how they helped a revolution with brilliant technology. That's next.